Right, hang on a second. How do I... Just going to pop this out. Move that across. Right, so... Yeah, so there's a... Obviously your origin point is detached from the... Well, it's not detached, but it's moved from where the mesh is.
Right.
So what you want to do... So I'll move that back over there. I'm just going to shift that across here. So if you mess the origin point up in terms of, you want it to be where your mesh is, obviously what you can do is back into edit mode and just approximately move it back into position. But obviously if you've moved the mesh where you want it to be and you don't want to fiddle with it, what you can do is go into, make sure your mesh is selected. We want to be in object mode, not object mode, object menu. Where is it? Set origin.
We tried that, right?
And
it
then
didn't work.
You want origin to geometry. Try that.
Okay.
So make sure your mesh is selected. Object mode.
Object mode.
Yeah, just make sure the mesh is selected. That's it.
Mesh.
Object menu.
Mesh is selected. Object.
Set origin near the top.
Set origin.
Origin to geometry. And watch what happens.
My mesh jumps out.
Oh, hang on.
This is what happens. I'm still screen.
How have you got that? Is that parented?
I don't know.
Right, so go into, I mean, if you can still see my screen, go into, I'm just doing it with an overlay. Go into Object Properties,
Which is
the one with the square, this one, if you can still see my screen.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm trying to see. Is it the wrench tool?
The one above.
The one above?
Yeah, the square.
Okay.
Right, go into the Relations tab.
Okay.
Oh, that shouldn't do that. That's weird. Okay. Control Z just to undo that then. So objects, set transform, origin to geometry. So it should, I don't know if you saw that on my screen. Whoops, undo that. So there's the origin. Whoops. There's the origin, and it should jump to the center of the cube. So object.
The cube jumped back.
Yeah.
To the...
So I'm not quite. Origin to geometry. Okay. So what you can do as an alternative then, try this. With your mesh selected, go into edit mode. Right, so you want to be in edit mode. Select everything. And then, where is it? You want... snap. Yeah. I'm trying to get so used to using the shortcuts. I know what the shortcut is, but it's better for reviewing the video after the fact that, using the menu. So I'm trying to think of where the menu options are. So you want mesh, snap, and then cursor to selected. Mesh, yeah. snap. And its cursor to the select fourth from the bottom. That's it. See what that does. Right. Okay. So now that that's done, so
What's that little point that's out here?
yeah, don't worry. That's the origin point, but don't worry about that yet. Let's see if this will work. So all we're doing, I'm just doing this on. Oops. So all we're doing is moving the 3D cursor to the center of mass of our mesh.
Right.
So I'm just going to do it on the screen, because what we're next going to do is back into object mode. And then what we can do in the object menu is try a different set origin point. And this time what we're going to do is origin from 3D to 3D cursor. So try that.
It popped it back out in lava.
That is really weird.
Leave it to me to.
Yeah.
Absolute enigma. I don't know how I did that.
Okay, so undo. Okay, object menu, parent. So we're down here, object, parent. And you want down at the bottom, clear parent and keep transform. Okay.
Huh?
That's all right. Clear parent, keep them transform. Right, okay, so go back into object menu again. And then set origin. Try it again. Origin to 3D cursor. Okay, send me the file. This is weird.
I'm just gonna save it right here and send it to you.
Okay.
Okay, let me
That's weird.
stop screen sharing.
Yep.
Okay.
The thing is, Kat, I've already done everything you just had her do.
Oh,
That's
shoot.
that's weird.
How do I get out of screen share here?
Oh, you'll have to mouse down to the bottom, your taskbar, and then it's just click on the little stop streaming button.
Which I can't see.
The look, red X,
Oh,
red.
no, that's.
Oh, is she still streaming?
No, I'm still.
No, we can still see. We can only see Blender, so we can't see the rest of the screen.
Stop screen.
There you go. That's it. That is weird.
Let me send that file. to
Yeah,
you.
drop that in the
No way I
chat.
did it. Goodness gracious, Mr. Boomer. To me to break Blender.
Well, I mean, notwithstanding Blender's own idiosyncrasies, that's just very odd.
And maybe you could also figure out why it is this a permanent wireframe.
Oh yes, yes.
I'm gonna send this one directly to you.
Okay.
Click the text bar.
Let me do something as I'm doing this way. Okay, now you should have it.
Right, okay. Download. Right, drop that in. What version of Blender were you using?
That is
Bottom right.
2.9.
9.3.
Yes.
Okay, good.
2.93.9.
Yeah, good. Right, so let's take a look at this.
I can imagine that your desktop is full of Blender files.
Huh?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
kinda. It's the starter files. It's that one. Okay. So here's a tip: when you're opening somebody else's project file, you know, everyone has a different way of working with Blender in terms of setting up the layout. So what you can do is click on the little wheel icon in the corner of the file browser and disable load UI, and that'll just reset the interface so that you get the file contents without any modifications to the interface that they might do in their projects. So if we open this, it'll just bring in the file. So you use the toolkit for this, yes? Or
Yes.
right, okay, so that's the attachment tool.
But for some reason, it's not attached to the...
Yeah, yeah, don't worry.
And it's a wireframe. The rest of the text, the facing is missing too. And I'm like,
Right,
where
so
did I
we'll
paint
take a
this?
look at that first, and that will likely be, so in viewport display, you've got an option down here, display as. What you probably did by accident was a shortcut combo, an accidental shortcut combo, which is, you know, common. I do that all the time. And you want to just select textured. And there is your...
Or display?
Yes. So we're in object properties.
Uh-huh.
And then down at the bottom we have viewport display. And then you have display as. And there's a drop down list. You just click on that and you can set the option that you want.
As wire. There we go.
Yeah.
That's why. Ta-da!
So also...
Put it as textured.
Sorry?
Solid.
Talking to Carmen, she put it as solid instead of textured.
Oh, well,
Yeah, I
it's...
haven't put a texture on it yet.
Yes, yes. So it will, if it's not textured, it will appear as being solid. It'll actually use. Oh, you haven't got a material on it yet either, so that's why it's solid. So if it's got a material assigned,
I haven't done that yet.
yeah, no worries. It'll appear coloured, so you can colour it, and it'll stay coloured until you've got an image. So let's just do a quickie. So image texture. So it'll go black because we don't have an image, and then of course we just create our image. So let's just call this tie, and then 256 by 256 blank color. So the color, this black, comes from this option at the moment. It's set to color. So you can actually change that here. And it won't change immediately, but it'll go green. So we've created a texture now, but to edit that, what we have to do is either go into UV space or texture paint, UV editing workspace, view sidebar, so we get the options for the image, and then we can just click on the different image types. So that's a generated image. So if you want it, and also so if you made an error, let's say, whilst you were setting your material up, and you wanted to change the size, because obviously it's a bit squashed. If you wanted to change the size of that, as long as you've got this sidebar open with the image properties, you can change the image size on the fly. So let's make this slightly wider. Whoops, that's taller.
All the way around.
Yeah, I always get that wrong. 512. And then we can see. Yes, you're not the only one. There's our texture, and the mapping is much better now. So you can adjust the image after the fact in UV editing workspace or texture paint workspace if you were painting your texture. So if we
Literally just put my texture maps on there that I use, kind of similar to what you got on there.
Yeah, and all you need to do, again, if you wanted to do something, changing the proportion or the size of the image, if you're in Paint, Texture Paint workspace, you've got the same options. Image, and we can change the size again. So there are a couple of places that you can actually change it, but of course all we need to do now is just paint on that, and we're painting our texture.
Yep. I played around with that earlier, but nothing happened because I was viewing the wire, and I'm like, I know the texture's there, we just can't figure out how to change it back.
Yeah. So yeah, that's viewport display. So whoops, whenever you do that, it's always going to be in object properties. And it doesn't matter what workspace you're in. So we're in Texture Paint at the moment. Viewport display, and then down at the bottom, display as textured solid. Well, it'll be white anyway, but
I was
wireframe.
looking for how to bake the texture, or at least get that nice little.
Yes. Yeah. So
It's not there anymore.
right, so texture baking is a bit more complicated, but we've got the basics set up in terms of the image has a UV map,
Right.
and it has the texture associated with it. So if we switch into UV editing, this just is so that we can see the bake process as it's doing its thing. Whoops. Pardon me. Let's just view, align, view. No, which one is it? See again, shortcut keys.
Wouldn't be number one?
Well, what I'm looking for is, well, normally it's just the numpad delete or numpad period, and that focuses the camera on the object. So as we were just doing, because of the way that the file was brought in, when we were moving around the object, it's moving like that. But if we want to actually move around the object to make manipulation and navigation of the scene easier, we want to be in view. And I can't remember where
I
the...
did it yesterday too.
Sorry?
I can't remember what it is.
Well, I know what the shortcut key is. I just can't remember where it is in the menu stuff. Oh, there it is. Frame selected. What am I doing? It's there. So frame selected, and it'll jump to, so we're now rotating around our object. So for baking, let's switch out of edit mode into object mode. We need to switch the render engine. So as explained in the article that was linked. I'll just drop that in. We can't bake textures unless we're in cycles. So we have to switch the engine to cycles. The options update a little bit, and we've got bake down at the bottom here.
Oh, that's
So
what I was looking for yesterday.
Yeah.
we can't bake it if we're in edit mode. We gotta be in object
Oh no,
mode.
it's not. So object mode, edit mode, and all of that sort of stuff. So we've got different modes, obviously. Object, edit, sculpt, vertex. Those are called your context or interaction mode, as it's shown in the tooltip. They used to call it context edit, the context of what you're doing. But to bake textures, you have to switch the actual render engine, which is in the render properties. So it's this setting, and that has to be cycles. There is a technical reason for why that's the case, just, you know, from the point of view of the Blender developers, but we have to be in cycles because that then exposes the bake options. And then of course we've got our bake type, and this is the thing that we want, that sets the type of image that we're trying to generate. So if we, there it is, diffuse. So click on that, and if we want to include lighting, we keep these enabled. If we want to exclude lighting, so that we just use color, so that's the color of the material that's assigned to the object, we disable those. So let's just quickly check the material. So the one thing you have to watch out for is that if you are baking, you have to disconnect the image node from the main principled BSDF. It will still bake if they are connected, but it'll give you an error, because what we want is to set or to bake depending on what you're baking. But what you can do is, just to get the basic diffuse color, you can set the diffuse color in base color. So we've got it set to green at the moment, but it can be any color. But you need the image texture node, because that's what's going to be mapped to. That's what the rendering process is essentially translating or converting the image, the image data, and that's the substrate, the canvas, if you like, that it's going to bake to.
I wish Roy would be on the call, because Roy is the one who kind of like perfected he does it just like Delort. They make their texture maps, their overlays.
Yes.
With baking, but not actually applying the bake.
Yes.
That's
yes.
what I was trying to figure out how to do, so I can get that nice shape of the bone to where it has the nice shading already.
Yes. Yeah,
because
well,
I
that's...
had the lights in place and everything, and it looked good, and I was like, now I need to figure out how to bake it.
Yeah, right, so if we've got our diffuse color, which is green, what we should see is when we click on the bake button, this color will appear on our bone.
The green color.
The green color, yeah. So if we click bake, it turns green. So that is baking. That's texture baking. You don't necessarily need to be in object mode for this. It's just that on bigger projects.
You have a solid texture now baked on there, so you
yes.
have no shading, so you
no.
can't actually see the bumps of the
no.
bone and everything.
Right. So this is where texture baking gets a little tricky.
Right.
Because, so if you're doing diffuse, that's kind of okay. You know, what you've done is fine, because all we're doing is translating the color that's associated with the principled BSDF material node. We're just converting that into an image. So it's applied to both sides of the object. So if you wanted to do something else, so you are now wanting, let's say we want to, I don't know if are there any lights?
The wireframe where the wire doesn't show up, but just the texture, and you have the nice shading.
Yeah, so this is the tricky part. So because of the way that you've UV mapped your bone, your UV map is in 2 sections, I guess it is.
Yeah, back and front.
Yeah. So here's the tricky part. So if you're going to start doing, so let's do it. Whoops, wrong one.
Like, what if she make a seam and have
Yep. Yeah.
The back and front separate?
Yeah. So if we bake ambient occlusion, because the scene hasn't got any lights in, so it won't actually bake any shadows. So we could bake. Oh, it's underneath the green highlight. We could bake a shadow map, but obviously the scene doesn't have any lights in, so we can't do that. But we can do ambient occlusion. So if we bake that, let's just check that's okay. So it's baked the map, but can you see what's happened?
Yeah, I see that.
That's because the process can't determine. Well, what it's basically done is it's rendered both the front and the back over the same UVs.
Yep.
Because the UV map is in one solid part. It's one solid. So what you would do for something like this. So that's the back. When you are setting up your UVs for something like this, what you want to do is try and you're going to split this in 2, so you have a front and a back. But what you want to try and do with the UV seams is hide-ish where the seam actually is. So you want to put it in a position where it's not necessarily going to be as clearly visible, because obviously this back part of the bow is going to be more or less hidden from view when it's in its position. So what you can do here is, so let's add mark seam, and then what we're going to do is redo the UV map. So select all, just going to redo this, UV unwrap. So it's going to do that because, let's try conformal. So it's still going to do that. So let's try from view. Yeah, sometimes it's useful, sometimes other times it's not as useful.
I click off of it and click back on one piece and like try to separate them.
Yeah, it doesn't do it. If you've done it from view, it ignores the seams because the orientation forms the seam essentially, so so it's a bit
easier to do it that way.
So what we can do is just move that. So we've got islands selected. Use our widget, just move that up there, then invert the selection, scale that up, just move that, whoops, in fact, so select all, because this is the back, doesn't need to be too big. So we can just plonk that down there. So if we do, so we're in texture mode. If we do the bake again, so we're still in ambient occlusion, or we're still baking the ambient occlusion. Bake. And what we get is that, but it doesn't appear on the mesh yet, because what we need to do, shading workspace, we now can connect that to base color, and it'll show the ambient occlusion, although it's a little bit messy.
Right.
So you'll have to, when you're doing your baking, it's not always going to produce clean. Oh, that's why, of course. So what we needed to do.
You can lower the margin on it. Ooh,
Oh no, it's
so
not.
it don't
It's
spread.
yeah, no, it's not the margin. It's just the way that we've done the. Because what we've done is we've got whoops. We forgot to make some adjustments to the UV map. Because we push that to the back, we forgot to compensate for these edges that are on our UV map. They're hidden. Oh, well, they're not hidden as such, but they're behind our object. So you have to play around with your seams. So what we could do, I mean, this is where it gets time consuming, because the quick way obviously is to just, whoops. The quick way is just to essentially just add a seam and split the thing in half. Then unwrap, and it'll do that again. That's really weird why it does that. I wonder if... Right, so when you're unwrapping, keep an eye on if you've resized and reshaped the mesh in object mode. It changes the scale. So when you do that and you start UV unwrapping, the UV map is relative to the original shape of the object. So if this was the cube and you've reshaped it and mushed it, I don't quite know the mechanics of what Blender is doing in terms of the math behind this, but what you'll find is that if you reset the object, apply, rotation, scale. So if we watch what happens to these options, these values, where's it gone? Apply, there it is. It resets everything to 0, and this should, if we then redo the UV map, it corrects it. So we're now dealing with a proper UV map. So keep an eye on that. So it'll go from something like that because the object's scaling is all wonky because the mesh has been manipulated in object mode. So make sure you reset. So object, apply, rotation and scale. And then when you redo your UV map, you should find, whoops, select all, you should find that it corrects the UVs. So now that we've got that, we should find So let's, whoops. Let's just move that over there. Rotate. Let's use the universal, it's easier. So that's our bone. So if we rebake this now, so again, render properties, bake, bake. Has it updated the texture? Oh no, it hasn't, because we need to uncouple it from the material so that we can rebake it again. And we don't need to switch. Ambient occlusion. So there's the image, and we should now find that corrected. And it's not corrected it. Why hasn't he done that? That's weird. Let's force it. There we go. So it's fixed. Sometimes you have to do that. You have to give it a whack with a hammer and just reset the image. So what we did there was so we're in the UV editing workspace. In the image menu, we've got this little asterisk after the image label that tells us that there is some data to be saved. So the previous baked image data is in memory, so it's temporary. So we can just go into the image menu and reload it, and it'll reload what we originally assigned as the texture to the tie in the material. So all we need to then do is just rebake, and it'll do what we need to do, and it'll clear it and override it, and that we can then save. So once we've baked our image, we can save this. So save as, and that'll make it permanent and keep it associated with the material that we can then link. And that's your ambient occlusion. And for shadows, you'd do the same thing, but obviously we're just using a different map type. But you need your lighting set up for that. So that's your baking.
Right.
But so let's see if we can figure out why. Whoops. View, frame selected. So object relations. So there's no object parented to that at all.
It's supposed to be with the other items because it's
Yeah.
part of the choker, and for some reason it's no longer in there. Originally it was in there, and I don't know how I got it out of that tree.
Yeah, no worries. Well, we've got the origin in the center of the mesh now, which
Yeah,
is
it's locked in place.
yeah, which is what we needed. But so all we need to do. Oh,
That's the issue.
that is so weird. Oh, I need. Yeah, I know why. Yes, I know why. Okay, so yeah.
Did I animate it by accident?
Yes, you did.
How the heck did I manage to do that?
No, it's well. If you press the space bar,
I know.
it animates the timeline. So if you then do something, I mean, Blender is literally, it's quite literal. When you're in the timeline, at least anyway, it will literally animate whatever you do, or it will keyframe whatever manipulations you do in the scene. So you always have to make sure you're at 0 when you are working if the timeline is active, because
I didn't realize that the
no,
timeline
it's
activated
no
yesterday.
worries, no worries. I do this all the time. It's quite a common problem.
Yes,
So
it was attached to the space bar.
yeah.
I was trying to hit Alt and I hit the space bar instead.
So for this, so what we can do is we have a timeline dope sheet. See if the action editor has any keyframes. No, it doesn't. Okay, so what we have to do then, that's weird, doesn't even have any. We should be able to. Why can't we delete that? That's weird. We should be able to just delete.
That's when I make a doozy, I make a big doozy.
Well, it's you know, I mean, this is the thing with Blender, is that over time they change things, and for animation we use the action editor. We don't use the timeline, so we use the dope sheet and the action editor. So if you were in the action editor and you moved that, you'd have a keyframe. You know, if you had that set. But in the timeline, it doesn't do the same thing. But it should mark a keyframe in the... I mean, it's got the data there, but it doesn't clear it, which is weird. But anyway, that's beside the point. So yes, it's because you were in, or you had the timeline set, so you can now position this and do what you need to do, and it shouldn't affect there needs to be a way of getting rid of that, selecting and getting rid of it. Yeah, that's weird. I would have thought they would have fixed that by now.
Could you like right click on it and see if there's an option?
No, that's what I'm doing. Yeah, it's what that would normally be the thing that you can do. You can just select it and just delete it, but it won't. It doesn't delete. So
Oh.
that's very weird. So what you might have to do. Yeah, that's kind of weird. That seems like a bug to me, but that's what's going on anyway. So that's what's happening. Is it's for some reason it's animating the object and it won't let us.
What if you update the location? Would that stop it from doing that? Because the only thing changing is its location.
Yeah, like
Well, it's
recreate the animation.
yeah. So what it's doing is it's storing the positional data of the object somewhere. And what we should be able to access that, and it should literally be appearing in the timeline as, you know, as a, I mean, I don't know how clear this comes through, but there's this brown, pale brown line at the bottom of the screen. So what should be happening is that this object should be recognized in the timeline, in the channels list. There should be a name. What do we call this? Cube. So cube should be listed as a channel, and then we should have
Dots.
yeah, duration. Our duration should be listed with our channel, but it's not doing that for some reason, even though it is moving it. So that's what's going on. So with this, what I would suggest doing, if this is playing up like this, what you might want to do is, although this might bring in, so let's just save this, save as. Let's try this, see if it works. You can see how, I mean, this is the thing with the creating generally, is that, you know, all you're doing is creating a bow tie, but inadvertently you can create all sorts of issues that can't, you know, you don't know what caused them, and you can't seem to figure out a solution to them. So when things like that happen, what you might be able to try is just resetting the scene. So we've got, so we were using the attachment tool. So, it's, you know, so what we can do, so if we, what bone was it connected to?
Neck bone.
Which
Yeah,
one?
that one.
01. Okay.
O2.
02. Right, so selected the mesh, female. So what we should now be able to do is append just the mesh. So you have to find your file, double click. So we want object folder, and we want, so I'm going to guess it's cube, cylinder, and cylinder 01. Active collection, instance object data, localize all, deselect, and then append. So it's brought everything in. We're at frame 1. So it has brought in the animation data for some reason as well. No, that looks like a bug to me.
I always find the bugs.
Yes. Let's try.
A knack for finding bugs. Is it a toolkit bugs or is it a Blender bug?
No, it might be a Blender bug. Okay, so I'm just going to use, using the latest version. All I'm going to do here is whoops, crashed. Append. Object. Cube. So there's the mesh object. Whoops. Yeah, for some reason, I don't know why it's doing that. It shouldn't be doing that at all. That looks like it's a bug. I don't know why that's... See, because there's no animation data in any of the object isn't identified in the channel list, and there's no animation data in the timelines. See, there's none. There's nothing.
Right.
So why it's doing that, I have no idea. Yeah, that looks like it's a bug. So the only thing I can suggest to that is you may have to, the only option may be to redo the project. But the other thing that you were... Let's bring in... Don't save. Right, so we'll ignore that for now because I'm not quite sure what's going on there. That shouldn't be doing that at all. I don't know why it is. So, when you're making your meshes and you drop your meshes into the scene, as you mentioned, in the outliner, they'll drop in at the bottom of the list, generally speaking. So to make sure that they export correctly for IMVU, all you need to do is wherever your mesh is in the outliner, just click, make sure it's selected, and then just click, drag, and you can move it over the attachment export folder or collection, release, and it drops into place. And then obviously you want to rename it if you... and thingy, and then you should be able to export that without any issues. Well, no, in fact, actually, yes, you should be able to, as long as it's at frame 0, even with this bug, when you export, it should still work because you're not necessarily going to include any animation. So even if it does include animation in IMVU, so when you import this into Studio, let's just do a quick... let's just do a... Oops. Female empty, derive. Haven't exported it, but this is just... So import, FBX. Let's go Beambo Pose, open. So it's given us a preview. So when you import it, you're obviously going to get the preview and it'll tell you whether there's an animation associated with the file. So when you're setting it up, all you need to do is just go through, and then if it does list an animation, just deselect these and it should only then just bring in the mesh and the materials, so you should then be able to import. But that's I mean, without rebuilding the project, that'd be a quick way of doing it, of just excluding the animation when you bring it in. But that's yeah, so you've got your texture baking. So sort out your UV maps to make it conducive to a clean bake, so that we don't get... Oh, and that's one thing you want to do, and depending on the map you're using, be mindful of, so for example, we're using the ambient occlusion at the moment, and the map that's being baked is relative to the position of the object in respect to the avatar. So it's obviously creating pretty hard shading where that's near the avatar. So you're going to get some clipping, color clipping, where the shading gets really dark. So what you might want to do is just keep it within range of the avatar so that you get the general shading, or the general influence, I should say, of the avatar and its shape.
What I was doing yesterday,
Yeah.
I had it out and I didn't have it quite rotated yet, and I had 2 suns in place to get just the right lighting. And I was ready to bake it, and I'm like, where the hell did they hide the bake button?
Yeah.
What the hey?
Yeah.
And I looked everywhere, tried to get Roy to respond because he was online. Nope, nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, watch.
Yeah. So you can keep repositioning it just to get the ambient occlusion at least, so we can see how this is darkening as the object gets closer to the avatar. But you want to be careful not to get it so close that you get those, it's burnout essentially.
That's actually good enough.
So obviously you then just save, once you've got the bake the way that you want it, just save the image. So save as, image, save as. But for, for lighting, you can either use, where is it? Yeah, so once you've got your lights in, let's drop a light in the scene. So add, where is, oh there it is. Point light. So
No, I
where's that?
rotated it on the X just to kind of get it to...
Right, so let's just do a simple front on. So what we're expecting from this bake is a brighter front and a darker back. Right, I'm going to switch back to render because that's making my PC fan go all wonky. Shadow, bake type, select our object, and then just click bake. And that creates a shadow map. We don't need to be in render mode for this. We just need to have lights in the scene. Alternatively, what we can do is set the bake type to diffuse and disable color, and we should get the same sort of result. Well, it's gone black, but let's try disabling indirect, see what that does.
Yeah, it could be because you take off the color, that's why.
Yeah, that's right. So it's because we're connected.
Right.
So if we disconnect that and then rebake. See, this is all the stuff that you have to keep in mind when you're doing this.
Yeah.
There we go. And then link it back up. And there we've got our shadow map. But because it's a diffuse bake type, even though colour is absent, it will still tint and influence the shadows, but the shading will be less harsh, or the shadow maps will be less harsh than if it's just a plain shadow.
Right.
Whoops. Yeah, so it did it without it. Some of the maps will work without... some of the maps will work or bake with it being connected. Other ones need this to be disconnected. But, you know, you can generate your maps, save the images. So if we're fiddling around in the shading editor, click on the hamburger,
Right.
image, and it's the same thing. Save as, or save a copy. And then in your 2D editor of choice, just layer your maps up and, you know, adjust your images as you see fit.
Right.
But yes, I mean, that's the so that was the baking, the origin point, UV maps. There's something else as well, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, so with the object being out of whack and it's not moving back, that's an animation thing, and I don't know why that's doing that. It shouldn't be doing that at all.
Well, you recorded the video.
Yeah. But that's weird. But yes, so that's your bow tie problem sorted out. Sort of.
It's a collar with a bone pendant, but that works. It does
Yes.
look like a bow tie too.
Oh yes, it's a bone, sorry, yes. A bone tie. Right, so is that how long have we been going? Oh, we've been going quite a while, so that can't be right. So that's 1740. We started so this is 15, 16. Have we been going 2 hours?
Yeah, it's 11:41 of my time.
Holy moly. Well, does anyone have any quickies then? I didn't realise we've been going that long.
To say that we have more than one UV maps that we want a big texture on. But the
We can't.
procedure,
For IMVU, we can't do that.
can't do that?
No, we can't have more than one. If you mean, do you mean, so
Yeah.
object data properties, do you mean having more than 2 entries in the UV maps section? Or do you mean, as we did with the bone map here?
Yeah, like how
yes.
you have the front and the back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. You can do that. That's an option. Optimally, from an optimization point of view, this is what you ideally want to be doing especially if you're going to start baking your textures. If you start baking things, you need to separate the maps out so that, as we saw at the beginning when we initially baked this, because the UV maps are sat on top of each other when you do a front projection. We just did a project from view. So we had this, before we did that, let's just undo that. So if you note, so we've got the front. Dagnabbit. So I'm just going to select the front. Then if we do a project from view, that's one way we can unwrap, do a cheap quick unwrap, is by selecting the components that we want and then doing a project, and that will create a separate section of the UV. So it's doing a projection of the object based on the selected faces. So it's creating a UV from the selection. Otherwise, if you're doing the whole thing, so we can get a wonky UV map, but it's doing the whole thing as part of view. Yeah, so it's projecting it from view. So if we match up the orientation of the object, so ideally what you want to be doing is using seams for baking at least and splitting your UVs up. And you will get, depending on the kind of map that you are creating and the position of the lights and things like that, you may find that you still get an edge, but that may be a faux edge, as in a false edge, and it's doing that because of the orientation of the object relative to the light. So it's got a relatively hard cutoff around the edge of our object, which gives us the impression of a relatively hard edge on the UV map, on the UVs, not the UVs, on the baked image. But we can use texture baking. We can use this. We just have to make sure that our UVs are set up. Whoops, our UVs are set up to accommodate. Because what we're essentially doing when we use bake is creating a completely unique image. So we have to make sure that the UVs are set up to accommodate that, so that we're not baking, it's not baking over the top of. But if you don't have the UVs set up with respect to texture baking, you'll end up overriding. So what's happening is the bake process is potentially baking the front and the back to the texture in the same space, because the front and the back UVs are in the same space. So it's trying to render what should be two separate faces. So our front and back, it should be rendering those as separate images or separate parts of our image. But if you don't do your UV maps properly with respect to baking, it'll bake those two faces to the one area of the UV or the image map. So keep an eye on that when you are using bake. But you can do that for anything. So although we've done a bone tie, we can do it for clothing, other accessories, anything, just as long as your UVs accommodate the end result.
What's the best way to set up a UV to, like on a shirt, to unwrap it and get it baked?
What do you mean?
Like
In
if I
term,
was gonna improvise the folds that I put into the clothing, would it be best to have a sun as the lighting or a spotlight?
right, I see what you mean. It depends, really. That's going to depend on the look that you want. Most of the time, you'll find that ambient occlusion is more than enough for getting what you want.
Okay.
But if you do want to do that, you can. You just need to set up the lights in the scene with respect to the visual effect that you are trying to create. So, if there was a leather jacket, let's say we had a leather jacket, what you'd have to do is, well, you've got two things to consider. You obviously need to make sure that you are baking the texture with the avatar in this position, in this T-pose. Because what you want to try and avoid is getting too dark a shadow or shading on the underside of the arms and the sides of the torso. Because in IMVU, obviously, once you start using the item, as soon as the avatar lifts its arms above its head, you're exposing a very dark area of the item that doesn't then match the scene or the room's lighting, which may look a bit incongruous. So for clothing, what might be best is 2 light sources, or maybe 3. Position something like this. Again, depending on how you want the lighting to be representative of a room generally. So let's say 2 lights at the side and 1 light at the front. So you're essentially accommodating. So we're in a big room. And what you're doing is you're accommodating light from the top. So light source is up here somewhere. So if you were in a room that didn't have any lighting, you're still then generating a baked map that's reasonable with respect to the kind of lighting that you might expect in a room under normal conditions. And what this will do is the top light source obviously takes care of the general lighting from the top of the scene. And then these 2 will be your side or secondary or incidental lighting that will take care of the sides and under the arms, so that those don't go too dark. And obviously all you need to do is just, some test bakes and adjust the light sources so that you're adjusting. Let's just, don't want to crash my computer. So let's change this to 50 watts. It's not light enough. Let's go with 200 watts. So if we just zero, whoops, wrong one. 0. Oh, this is scaling my computer up like nobody's business.
Alright, then hold off on that.
But you get the impression or the sense of what's needing to be done. You just adjust your light sources so that you get the right kind of shadow and shading that you want under these extremes, which are normally not lit, so that when the object is used in IMVU, this doesn't become incongruous when it appears or when it's visible. So you're adjusting your light sources. I'll just do an extreme-ish so that you are evening out. And then, of course, you've got to compensate for the back of the object as well, depending on what that is. So you don't want that back side to be too dark, but you do want it to be darker than the front to replicate the sort of a general sense of scene lighting. But again, it depends on the effect that you're trying to generate with your baked maps. So it's just a question of experimenting. But that's what you would do. I mean, that's what CS was doing with her lighting, with the bone tie, is placing lights around the bone to get the appropriate map baked for the shadows. But that works for everything. It'll work for everything. Clothing, shoes, hair.
The second thing I've been wondering is I have a animated pose, but whenever it starts, no matter how I set it up to start, it starts standing up and it just slams down to the ground to get it to the animation.
Is that after importing to IMVU?
Yes.
Yeah, that. So with that is caused by when you import a pose. So let's import. Where are the poses? Right, so root test. So we'll just do an import. So this is all okay. That's okay. That's our bone. There, that's our animation. I mean, import. Oh, it didn't do it. I wonder if they fixed that then. If the skeleton, in some of the videos that we've been doing, if the avatar goes all over the place, what you need to do is once you've imported, after import, go into component, and you want skeleton, and then you get.
After I already do all that.
Yeah, well, if you've, you need to reset the skeleton to root node. To the default skeleton. If it's still doing it after, then there's possibly something. It shouldn't do it, but there's probably something wrong with the animation, or something's gone wrong with the export. So if it's,
I'll show you what I mean on that, if it's all right.
Yeah, show your screen. Right, so just drop this across so that people can see what's going on. Yep.
It's gonna look weird with this character.
That's all right.
How the moment I get onto it, up and it slams down to the ground.
What's the pose? What's the pose look like in Blender?
This right here.
Right, but how is it? What does the have you got the?
Up in Blender then.
Yeah. Oh, that looks no. That looks like it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. What is it not doing?
One moment is up, next moment is down. Right now I have a let me check. Let's check the animation. Hold on, though. 11 to 61. This way it has smooth pulse. Just so the days.
Oh, okay.
It just glitched up and jumped back.
Yeah, no. That's a bug. That's a bug with Studio, I think. I'm not quite sure. So what's going on there is for some.
I think that it's because he didn't have animated going down, like kneeling down.
No. It's yeah. Ordinarily, yes, but in this case, no. It's a bug with the way that Studio. Because if you bring your Blender, pop Blender back up on the screen. Yeah. So if you go to frame 0. Yeah. So it's a short, and then move the timeline so that we can see the sequence. Yeah. So it should be from frame 11 to 60 or 61.
I put 61 that way it doesn't stop for a moment while in the middle of animation and goes. If you do
so if you play the sequence in Blender, what's the sequence? Yeah, right. So if you go back to Studio, just play the sequence again. So click the play button or whatever it is. Yeah. So what's happening is, I don't know why it does this. It's something that I have to get the engineers to take a look at. But you've got your frame set, your start frame at 11, but there are, I'm just drawing on screen just for the sake of the video.
Okay.
But you've got yours starting at frame 0. For some reason, Studio isn't, what's the word? Isn't being literal enough with the frame, so you've got your start frame set at 11 and your end at 61. So what it should be doing, which is what we expect it to do, is it starts at 11 and ends at 61. But because there are another 10 frames before the start point, for some reason Studio doesn't ignore those. So it doesn't necessarily play through them all, but because there are frames before the start frame, it's not clearly delineating the duration based on the frames that you set, start and end. It's also including, even though it shouldn't, it's including those pre-frames that should be ignored. So it's not being
it's not being specific enough.
Yes, there is a it's like texture clipping. It's like, if you use an opacity map and you have alpha test set, you have the edge of your, well, it's like with the carpet that just did a tutorial for. So you have the edge of your carpet, and the edge is set firmly by the alpha clip value, and depending on the value itself, that clip might change, but we don't get any interference from the bits that are outside the clip. So the animation is essentially doing the same sort of thing, but for animation instead of clipping a texture. So it's including the frame 0 to 10 in that preview that it gives you, or at the reset. So it's something the engineers will probably need to take a look at. I've noticed it myself. It's not just you, by the way. I've noticed this with mine as well. My animations and sequences. So it seems to be a bug. Yeah, thanks for stopping by, Cleon.
Alright.
I'm gonna stop streaming.
That's all right. Well, if there aren't any other questions or issues, we'll call it quits there, because we have been going for 3 hours. I didn't know it was... time flies when you're having fun, as they say.
Yep.
Right, so, yeah, we'll call it quits there. And so this was an interesting Fix It Friday.
A long-lasting one, huh?
A very long-lasting one. Didn't expect it to go that long.
You
know,
have
that's
to edit your video.
Well, yeah. So yes. So I'll upload this. It'll be available for Discord, and then eventually it'll be made public, so everyone can see the sort of the problems that need to be fixed. Because there's usually information that's useful to everyone with these sorts of things. But thanks for dropping by. So that's King, Chelamore, Cleon, and CS. And we shall see you on the next Fix It Friday, which will be next Friday.
Okay. I appreciate the help.
You're very welcome.